finally have an opportunity to speak on the federal budget. It has been long overdue as the first one presented to this Parliament. While we are looking at what the budget offers to Canadians, as well as the late timing, it is important for all of us to remember that the theme of this Liberal government is that, that the key to happiness is low expectations. It is also worth reminding the Liberal government that if you are going to keep people waiting or ask for an extension on a deadline, you had better make sure the final product is worth the wait by making it impressive. But it was not worth the wait, and the large number of pages only makes it a bigger disappointment. It was disappointing that the Liberal government, unlike the provinces, didn't even bother to present one at all for last year. And speaking of the provinces, if the federal government really wanted to prioritize a pandemic response, we should have expected them to focus on the requested increase of health transfer. So whatever happened to those? Apparently, for this government, giving fuller consideration to the future of Canadians and their grandchildren and their children's future was not worth the effort. Canadians were also not shown basic respect for their rights, time, money, or for their trouble during the past year. What might be worst part of the government's disregard is that it really shows up in this budget. For today, I want to focus on where the lack of leadership is taking us as a country. I want to speak in particular of the rural-urban divide. Especially at the federal level, we should always be trying to promote national unity in the face of any number of divisions. Regional differences have always been a source of tension, and they continue to come up in our own day. It is getting more common again to hear and talk about the idea of Western alienation, for example, as having the potential of turning into separatism. As a Western Canadian MP, I definitely believe that this is a growing social problem which needs to be addressed for the benefit of all Canadians. Sadly, we have already reached a point where it was obvious that this Liberal government does not care for Western Canada. It is hardly a surprise to anybody, and with this budget, they are not even trying to pretend much more either. But while saying this, I also think we should be missing another essential part of the larger issue if we do not consider the problems common to rural Canada, regardless of regions. The rural-urban divide in Canada is one of the greatest divides experienced today, whether it's in the prairies, the Atlantic, Ontario, the North, BC, or Quebec. Before getting into some of the details and how the Liberal budget will affect rural Canadians, or more accurately, how it will leave them behind, we can get a general sense of the Liberal government's stated priorities from their own words. The nice thing about having a budget in front of us right now is that, for better or worse, it forces them to clarify on the record where they choose to place their priorities. Even though they have avoided and delayed this important measure of accountability and transparency, we now have a better idea of what they say they care about and what they apparently do not care about. The word environment is mentioned 234 times in this document. What about the phrase natural resources? Only 19 times. But from those 19 times, I'll point out some examples, and it becomes quickly apparent that the Liberals use the phrase natural resources in relation to anything but energy workers, especially those in the oil and gas industries. $22.3 million through Natural Resources Canada to create an atomic workers recognition program, or $63.8 million over 3 years to create new flood maps for high-risk areas. To bring it even closer to home, these energy workers are mentioned one time, in this 724-page document. It is not even in the context of seriously proposing anything close to a full solution for this hard-hit sector of the economy. That single mention is in the context of how climate action can present opportunities for them. Years before COVID first arrived in Canada, and even more during a restricted economy during the last year, thousands and thousands of these workers have lost their jobs. Without any support and political certainty, many more Canadians will be joining them soon. This industry and these workers will comprise a large chunk of our nation's workforce and an even larger share of the national GDP. And again, they are mentioned once in 724 pages. During the last 6 years of Liberal government, energy workers have come to understand that when they are mentioned as part of new climate opportunities, it actually means that they are going to lose their job. Meanwhile, all their talk about creating futuristic jobs with big spending provides no real certainty about, or without any detailed practical planning. What about pipelines? There is a reference to a pipeline of innovation, a pipeline of vaccines, and a pipeline of talent. But there is not a single mention of energy pipelines. This is unaddressed in a year when nearly half of Ontario and Quebec's energy supply from Enbridge Line 5 is in danger from getting stopped by the Governor of Michigan. Western workers and investors are living with the fact that the dream project of Keystone XL is canceled and fading away. With Keystone XL, it's especially shameful because of some of who those investors are. It is very different from big corporations dreaming of profits. These are the dreams of real people. I especially feel the need to bring out the dreams of Nicanite First Nation and their chief Alvin Francis, whose company owns a part share in Keystone XL. They're planning on using the profits to help the people of his community. When I met with him during the winter before the cancellation of the project, he laid out quite clearly the plans for economic development and the jobs beyond working on the pipeline. These opportunities will no longer be happening thanks to the lack of effort of this government. The reality of Indigenous participation is too often ignored. It is a reconciliation issue, and we need to think of it this way. In my riding, which has an abundance of natural gas, there are mineral rights owned by First Nations from across the province of Saskatchewan that are at risk of losing their biggest source of income because of the anti-energy policies of the Prime Minister. Income that will not be replaced. Income lifted entire communities out of poverty. They do not have the luxury of waiting for the government to figure out an energy transition over 10 years or more, pushing it along without a plan. To these Indigenous communities and to all of Canada's energy sector, the silence is deafening. I've said the Liberal government has some stated priorities because their record can easily lead anyone to question if they will deliver on what they say they are going to do. When you live in rural Canada, as my constituents and I do, we are used to hearing a lot of empty promises, if we are lucky enough to hear anything from them at all. Most recently, we've had to wait and wait for them to begin rolling out the Universal Broadband Fund. They have made the UBF $2.75 billion, up from last year's announcement of $1 billion, but the deadlines for the first $1 billion have been continually shifting with almost nothing to show for it. Municipalities in my riding who are waiting for help getting broadband rolled out to their communities, or even just increasing the amount of broadband available, they are still waiting without as much of a peep from this government. Listing huge dollar amounts does not mean these problems will be solved. It also does not mean the Liberals will get around to finishing the job anytime soon. Now, I have to say, the more time I have had to work in Parliament, the more it becomes obvious how much Ottawa needs to regain more of a rural perspective. The best example for this debate might be the environment. If the Liberals want to mention the environment 234 times, they can go right ahead. Yes, let's protect and conserve the environment in every way. The economy can grow at the same time if we do it the right way, and we can all agree here on that. But do you know who already sets the bar high for doing this? Rural Canadians, people who work the land, enjoy it for sport, and who live out in the country surrounded by its beauty. They care about the environment. After all, farmers, ranchers, fishermen, energy workers, and others live off the land. They do it the best, acting as if the way of life depends on it, quite simply because it does. But they're not seeing a responsible approach to these issues. Instead, they see a government that is more interested in pursuing out-of-touch radical ideas and pet projects. This Liberal government could learn a lot from rural people if they would start listening to them and their concerns. They need to start respecting the fact that they're farmers and ranchers. They are the ones who are the true stewards of the environment. And quite frankly, when you look through all the different ways that the government is trying to focus on rural people, it's more or less that they're trying to split them off into separate groups, treating them as if they are special interest groups, patting them on the head and just saying, there, here we go, here's some pretty words for you, without actually doing anything to address the real concerns that are facing rural Canadians these days. Canadians are looking for stability and trust following times of uncertainty. They're getting neither from this Liberal government, which has decided to offer a campaign platform in place of a budget.